They towed my truck without warning, no call, no notice, no chance to move it. And that one move ended up costing them their entire operation. I didn't plan on taking anyone down. I'm not that kind of guy, but sometimes people push you just far enough that you either fold or you decide you're done being the easy target. And yeah, I guess that week, I decided I was done. So for context, I live in this mid-sized apartment complex just outside of Boise, Idaho. Nothing fancy, just one of those quiet places where everybody kind of keeps to themselves, waves if they see you twice, but doesn't really ask questions. I'd been there about 3 years at that point, long enough that routines settle in without you even realizing it. Same parking spot, same walk up the stairs, same old pickup sitting under this big crooked maple tree at the edge of the lot. My truck was kind of a relic, honestly, a faded blue '98 Silverado with a dent in the rear bumper and a radio that only worked when it felt like it. But it was mine, paid off, dependable, and more importantly, it had never caused anyone a problem. That spot, right under that tree, it wasn't officially labeled or anything, but it was understood, kind of an unspoken agreement. Nobody parked there because everybody knew that was where I parked. 3 years, not a single note on the windshield, not a single complaint, not even a sideways look. Even Mrs. Caldwell from Unit 2B, who complained about everything from loud footsteps to the color of people's curtains, never said a word about my truck. So that Friday, I packed a bag, tossed it into the passenger seat, and headed out of town to visit my brother in Spokane. Just a quick weekend thing, nothing dramatic. I remember locking the door, glancing back at the truck like I always did, just out of habit. It was sitting there, same as always, half in the shade, leaves scattered across the hood. Nothing felt off. Nothing hinted at what was coming. Monday morning, I got back earlier than expected, around 7:30, the kind of hour where the parking lot is still quiet. A few people heading out for work, coffee cups in hand, engines warming up. I pulled in, turned the corner, and immediately felt something was wrong. Like that weird hollow feeling you get when something's out of place but your brain hasn't caught up yet. The spot was empty. Not just empty, wrong. Too clean. Too still. I slowed down, actually circled the lot once, thinking maybe I'd parked somewhere else and just forgot, which I don't do, but your brain tries to make sense of things before jumping to the worst conclusion. But no, I knew that spot, every crack in the pavement, every root pushing up through the asphalt, and all that was left now was this faint dark stain where oil had dripped over the years. No broken glass, no tire marks, no sign of forced entry, just gone. And I remember just sitting there in my car for a second, hands still on the wheel, heart starting to beat a little faster, because your mind goes straight to stolen. That's the word that hits first. Stolen. Gone. Not coming back. Then I saw it. This bright yellow sign, bolted right into the curb, the paint still so fresh it practically reflected the morning light. Reserved parking. Unauthorized vehicles will be towed at owner's expense. I actually laughed. Not because it was funny, but because it didn't make sense. That sign wasn't there when I left. I would have noticed. You don't miss something that loud, that new, that aggressive. And that's when the confusion started turning into something else, something slower, heavier. I got out, walked up to the sign, ran my fingers along the edge. Yeah, the bolts were new. Someone had installed that recently. Very recently. Which meant one thing. My truck hadn't been stolen. It had been taken. And not just taken legally. Or at least, that's what they wanted it to look like. I went upstairs, dropped my bag inside, didn't even sit down, just grabbed my lease agreement out of the drawer like something in the back of my mind was already telling me this wasn't going to be simple. Then I came back down and started asking around. Most people gave me that shrug, you know the one. I don't want to get involved. A couple said they saw a tow truck late Saturday morning, quick job, in and out. One guy, Derek from Building C, mentioned he saw 2 men putting up signs Friday night, but he didn't think much of it at the time. Said he figured it was management finally getting strict about parking. Friday night. My stomach dropped a little when he said that, because I had left Friday afternoon, which meant those signs went up after I was already gone, and my truck was still sitting there. I went back upstairs, sat at the kitchen table, and finally took a breath. That kind of anger, it doesn't explode right away, it builds. It simmers. You start connecting pieces, and the picture gets clearer, and somehow that makes it worse. I started making calls. The property management office first. Got bounced around twice before someone finally gave me a name. Not even an apology, just a name like they were reading off a script. You'll need to contact Redwood Asset Services. So I called them. Another hold, another transfer, another person who sounded like they'd rather be anywhere else. And eventually, I got it. The towing company. Ironclad Towing. Even the name sounded like it was designed to shut down arguments before they started. The woman on the phone didn't ask questions, didn't hesitate, just pulled up the record and set it flat. Your vehicle was towed for violation of posted parking restrictions. Total due is $3,420. Cash or certified funds only. I actually blinked. $3,400 for what, exactly? Tow fee, administrative processing, and current storage. And if I don't pay today? There was a pause, just long enough to feel intentional. Storage accrues at $70 per day. $70 a day. And right there, that simmering anger tipped into something colder. Not panic, not frustration, clarity. Because this wasn't random. This wasn't some misunderstanding or a one-off mistake. This was a system, and I had just stepped into it. I hung up the phone and just sat there for a second, staring at nothing, letting the number settle in my head. $3,420, plus $70 a day, ticking up whether I liked it or not. And the thing that really got me wasn't even the money. It was how routine it sounded on her end. Like this wasn't unusual. Like I was just another name on a list of people who'd come back from a weekend and found themselves suddenly in debt to a system they never agreed to. I've worked construction most of my life. I know what things cost. I know what labor looks like. And there is no version of reality where hooking up a truck and driving it 10 miles costs that much unless someone along the line decided it should, and that thought stuck with me. This wasn't about parking. This was about leverage. I drove out to their lot that same afternoon, out past the industrial strip where the roads get wider and the buildings get lower. Chain-link fences topped with barbed wire, cameras on poles, the kind of place that's designed to make you feel like you've already lost before you even step out of your car. Ironclad's yard sat behind a sliding metal gate, rows of vehicles packed tight, everything from beat-up sedans to work vans to a couple motorcycles shoved awkwardly between bumpers like afterthoughts. My truck was there. I spotted it almost immediately. That faded blue paint stood out even in a sea of dust and rust. There was a small office near the entrance, bulletproof glass window, a metal slot at the bottom for payments. I stepped up, knocked once, and the same voice from the phone answered me through a speaker that crackled just enough to feel intentional. "You here for a release?" "Yeah," I said, keeping my voice even. "Silverado, blue, plate ends in 7K3. She didn't look at me right away, just kept typing, then finally glanced up, eyes flat, uninterested. $3,420. Cash or certified. I had already stopped at the bank. I had the envelope in my hand, and I hate to admit it, but handing it over felt wrong, like feeding something that shouldn't exist. But I needed my truck back. That was the priority. Everything else could come later. So I slid the envelope through the slot. She counted it twice. Of course she did. Then she printed out a receipt, stamped it hard like she was sealing something official, and slid it back to me. "Gate opens in 5. You've got 10 minutes to remove the vehicle." No apology. No explanation. Just process. I took the receipt, folded it carefully, and put it in my wallet like it mattered, because it did. When I got back into my truck, turned the key, and heard that old engine come back to life, I felt something shift. Relief, sure, but underneath that, something else was taking shape. Not anger, not exactly, more like focus. Because now I had proof. Now I had a timeline. Now I had a reason to start asking questions the right way. That night, I didn't turn on the TV, didn't cook anything complicated, just sat at the table with a beer and my lease agreement spread out in front of me, reading every line slowly, twice, then a third time just to be sure I wasn't missing something obvious. Legal language can be slippery if you skim it, but if you take your time, it tells you exactly what it can and can't do. And what mine said was interesting. There was a section on parking, sure, standard stuff about designated areas, guest limits, keeping vehicles operational, but nowhere, not once, did it give the HOA or management the authority to unilaterally reassign spaces without notice, and definitely nowhere did it authorize immediate towing without a grace period. In fact, there was a clause buried halfway down the page that said tenants were entitled to reasonable and uninterrupted use of available resident parking. Not assigned, Not restricted overnight, available. Which meant what they did didn't just feel wrong. It might actually be wrong. The next morning, I took a drive downtown, went straight to the city clerk's office. If you've never spent time in a place like that, it's quiet in a way that makes you feel like everything matters a little more. Rows of filing cabinets, people speaking in low voices, paperwork moving slowly but deliberately. I asked about ironclad towing, kept it simple, just wanted to know if they had any complaints on record. The woman at the desk gave me a look, not suspicious, just familiar, like she'd heard that question before. She typed for a bit, then nodded slightly. They've had citations, she said, turning the monitor just enough for me to see without fully inviting me in. 2 in the last 18 months. Both related to non-compliant towing practices. Non-compliant how? She shrugged, but it wasn't dismissive, more like careful. Insufficient notice. Improper signage. That kind of thing. That kind of thing. I thanked her, wrote down what I could, and left with a copy of the public record request in progress. That was piece 2. Piece 3 came from the state website. I sat in my truck in the parking lot, phone in hand, digging through statutes until I found it. Towing regulations, clear as day. If a property intends to enforce new parking restrictions, signage must be posted and visible for a minimum of 72 hours. Some counties even required longer. Hours. 7 days. 7 days. I leaned back in the seat and just let that number sit there, because now the timeline mattered more than anything. Derek said the signs went up Friday night. My truck was gone by Saturday morning. Not 7 days. Not even 1. And suddenly, everything lined up in a way that was almost too clean. New signs, immediate enforcement, high fees, prior violations. This wasn't sloppy. This was deliberate. They were counting on people not knowing the rules, or not having the time, or just paying and moving on because fighting it felt bigger than the problem itself. And for a lot of people, it probably worked. But I had the time. And now I had a reason. Tuesday evening, there was an HOA meeting scheduled in the clubhouse. One of those monthly things most residents ignored unless something directly affected them. I'd never been to one. Didn't care to. But that night, I showed up. The room was already half full when I walked in. Folding chairs set up in neat rows. A long table at the front where the board sat like a panel of judges nobody elected, but everyone had to deal with anyway. And right in the center was the guy I'd heard about, but never really paid attention to. Martin Hale, HOA president. Mid-40s, sharp blazer, polished shoes, the kind of smile that doesn't reach his eyes. He noticed me almost immediately, probably because I wasn't a regular. "Can I help you?" he said, polite on the surface, but already dismissing me. "Yeah," I said, walking forward, folder in hand. "You can listen." A couple people shifted in their seats. You could feel the room tighten just a little. He gave a small chuckle, leaned back in his chair. "If you're not on the agenda, you'll need to submit a request for." "I'm not here for the agenda." I cut in, setting the folder down on the table in front of him a little harder than necessary, not aggressive, just enough to make a point. "I'm here because my truck was towed illegally from this property 2 days ago, and I've got documentation that says you might want to rethink how this is being handled." That got their attention. Not loud, not dramatic, just precise. He glanced at the folder, then back at me, smile tightening. "All towing procedures are in compliance with community standards." "Community standards," I repeated, nodding slowly. "That's interesting, because state law doesn't mention your standards. It mentions notice requirements. 7 days, to be exact." Now the room was quiet. You could hear someone in the back shift their chair. I opened the folder, slid a copy of the statute across the table, then the lease clause, then the public record summary. "Your signs went up Friday night," I said, looking directly at him now, not raising my voice, just holding it steady. "My truck was gone Saturday morning." That's not compliance. That's a violation. And not just of state law, but of the lease agreement you're bound to uphold. One of the board members, an older woman with glasses perched low on her nose, leaned forward, actually reading what I'd put down. Another avoided eye contact completely. Martin tried to recover, straightening slightly. "If there was an error, we can review." "It wasn't an error," I said, cutting him off again, a little sharper this time. "And you know it wasn't. This company you hired? They've been cited before for the same thing. Insufficient notice. Predatory towing. It's on record." That word, predatory, hung in the air longer than the others. And I could see it land. He didn't smile this time. He didn't smile anymore, and for the first time since I walked in, Martin Hale actually looked like a man who realized the ground under him might not be as solid as he thought. Not panicked. Not yet. But recalculating, you could almost see it happening behind his eyes, like he was flipping through options and not liking any of them. The room stayed quiet, that kind of quiet where nobody wants to be the first to speak because they're not sure which side they're on yet. And I just stood there, hands resting on the table, not pushing, not backing off either, just letting the weight of what I'd said settle in. Finally, he cleared his throat, leaned forward slightly, fingers laced together like he was about to regain control of the room. "Mr. Dawson," I said. "Luke Dawson." "Mr. Dawson," he repeated, nodding as if that gave him some footing. "If there was a procedural oversight, we can certainly address your individual situation. There's no need to escalate this into something larger than it is." And there it was, the pivot. Make it small. Keep it contained. Handle me quietly so the rest of the system keeps running. I let out a small breath through my nose. Almost a laugh, but not quite. "You think this is about my truck?" He didn't answer that. I tapped the folder lightly. I already filed complaints this morning. State Attorney General's office, City Code Enforcement, and Channel 7's Consumer Watchdog desk. I gave them everything, timeline, photos, records, all of it. That did it. Not dramatic. No one gasped or anything like that, but you could feel the shift, like the air got heavier. One of the board members actually sat back in her chair, arms crossing slowly, like she was putting distance between herself and whatever this was becoming. Martin's jaw tightened just a little. "You went to the media?" "I went to anyone who enforces rules you seem to think don't apply here." For a second, neither of us spoke. It wasn't a shouting match, it wasn't even loud, but it was sharp, like two people standing on opposite ends of something that was about to snap. Then he nodded once, slow. "We'll review the matter and be in touch." I held his gaze a moment longer, then gathered my papers, turned, and walked out without another word. No slam of the door, no final remark. Just left them sitting in that silence they'd have to figure out how to fill. By the next morning, my phone started ringing. First call came in around 9:15. Unknown number. I let it go to voicemail. Then another. Then a third. By lunchtime, I had 6 missed calls and 2 voicemails, both from someone in property management suddenly very interested in resolving the misunderstanding quickly and amicably. I listened to one of them while sitting in my truck, parked in that same spot under the maple tree like nothing had ever happened, except now there was that bright yellow sign just a few feet away, still bolted into the curb, still pretending it had always been there. I called them back in the afternoon. Different tone this time. Softer. Careful. "Mr. Dawson, we'd like to offer a full reimbursement of your towing expenses," the woman said, voice measured, almost rehearsed. "And we're willing to review any additional inconvenience you may have experienced." I looked out through the windshield, watching a couple kids ride bikes through the lot, weaving around parked cars like they'd done it 100 times. "Not interested," I said. There was a pause. "I'm sorry. I paid to get my truck back. That part's done. You don't get to call it even just because you give the money back." Another pause, longer this time. "What would you consider a fair resolution?" Now that was the right question, but I didn't answer right away. I let it sit, let her wonder if I even had one. Because the truth was, I'd already thought about it. Not out of revenge, not entirely, anyway, but because systems like this don't change unless it costs them more to keep going than to stop. "I'll send it in writing," I said finally, and hung up. That night, I put it together. Nothing fancy, just clear. Direct. 1. They compensate me $1,000 per day for every day my vehicle was held in their impound lot. 2. Immediate termination of their contract with Ironclad Towing. 3. A written, enforceable policy stating that no resident vehicle can be towed without a minimum 7-day notice period and documented acknowledgement from the resident. I read it twice before sending, not to make it sound stronger, but to make sure it didn't say anything it couldn't stand behind. Thursday was quiet. Too quiet. No calls. No emails. Nothing. And I'll admit, part of me wondered if they were calling my bluff, if they decided it was easier to fight than fold, because dragging something like this out can wear a person down if you let it. But I'd already crossed that line. I wasn't walking it back. Friday, 2:37 p.m., my phone rang. This time, I answered. "Mr. Dawson," Martin's voice, controlled, but different now, less polished, more careful. We've reviewed your proposal. I didn't say anything. We're prepared to come to an agreement. I leaned back in my chair, eyes drifting to the window. That was quick. A faint exhale on the other end. Effective immediately, our contract with Ironclad Towing is terminated. We will be issuing a payment covering your requested compensation, totaling $9,000. Additionally, we will be drafting a revised parking enforcement policy consistent with state requirements. 9,000. Not the full number I'd calculated, but close enough that it told me everything I needed to know. They weren't negotiating anymore. They were containing damage. I want it in writing, I said. You'll have it by end of day. And the check. Available for pickup tomorrow morning. I let a second pass, just to make sure there wasn't anything else he wanted to add. There wasn't. All right, I said. Then we're done. When I hung up, I didn't celebrate. Didn't call anyone. Didn't do anything dramatic. I just sat there for a minute, listening to the quiet in the room, feeling that strange mix of satisfaction and something else. Not guilt. Not exactly pride either. More like confirmation. That pushing back, when you actually know where you stand, can change things. I picked up the check Saturday morning. Real, signed, no conditions buried in fine print. And by the following week, the yellow signs were gone. Not replaced, not updated, just gone, like they'd never existed. Ironclad Towing lost the contract, just like that. And word travels faster than people think. Couple months later, I heard from Derek that they were getting audited again. By 6 months, they weren't operating anywhere in the county anymore. Maybe they moved on. Maybe they shut down. I don't know. But whatever system they had going, it stopped working here. Now, every time I pull into that lot, swing into that same spot under the tree, shut off the engine, and sit there for a second, it feels the same as it used to. Quiet. Normal. But not quite. Because now I know how close that kind of normal can come to being taken away, and how few people ever push back when it does. So here's the thing I keep thinking about. Was it really about the money? Or was it about drawing a line and forcing people to see it? And if you were in that position, would you have just paid the fee, taken the loss, and moved on? Or would you have done the same thing, knowing it might turn into something bigger than you expected? Drop your thoughts in the comments. I'm genuinely curious where people land on this. And if you've ever dealt with something like this in your own community, I want to hear that too.